So we've got a few more answers to some burning 10th edition questions today. Perhaps the most important development is that universal special rules are confirmed back in Warhammer. Let's talk through Games Workshop's recent Q&A session. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where over the past couple of days we've been talking all things 10th edition. As anticipated, Games Workshop have been keeping the news coming thick and fast, and today they've followed up yesterday's announcement with a quick Q&A session, just a text-based one going over some of people's most common questions, and in a few cases giving us a few basic answers. I must admit, for the most part, it did feel like a slightly weak article, really. The majority of the questions are answered either with "we'll tell you later," "you'll find out," or fairly vague responses, but there are a couple of really quite helpful specific things. The universal special rule return thing is perhaps the biggest. First up, the first question is this going to be a completely new edition? I mean, they have basically announced it, and they say yes it is. They say every single rule on every single datasheet has been reassessed. Some are changed, and some are basically the same as they were in 9th. It's kind of similar to how things moved from 7th to 8th. A whole bunch of basic stats did stay the same, but a bunch of stuff was altered in one big way or another. I feel like their default is probably going to be to keep most of the stats broadly the same as they were before, unless they feel like they want to make things stronger, weaker, or just have a different feel with new game mechanics. Then the next one, which gives us some of the most interesting things, is the new edition quicker and easier to play? First up, they talk about the system that they did in their live stream, basically having the core rules of the game, then datasheets, data cards to easily access unit stat lines that you might be able to have just on printouts, or potentially buying their snazzy card sets. Then beyond that, each army gets one page of core rules for the faction, similar to World Eaters, as we talked about in the previous video a few hours ago. Feel free to check that one out after if you want a bit more in-depth discussion as to how the 10th edition rules are going to get rolled out. Perhaps the most important things that they said in this rules section, though, that make the game a little bit more streamlined to play. First up, they say that universal special rules are back, and they do give us a couple of examples of that, and also that core stratagems are more reactive somehow, which we'll talk about in a second. First up, the news that universal special rules are returning is fairly important, I think. Again, I had talked about the possibility of them doing this on the channel about a couple of weeks back. It's a concept that they have in Horus Heresy and in 7th edition 40k, where rather than having every single special rule written out on every single datasheet, a bunch of them are going to be consolidated for similar like-minded rules and put in the core book. As quite a lot of people have noticed throughout 9th edition, there's lots of rules that either have very minor variations or just the same rules with different titles, and it seems a little bit needless that they're reprinted all the time. It's a bit better to keep them all together. The two ones that they confirmed in the article that are definitely being made into universal special rules are Deep Strike and Feel No Pain. And what's more, the bit that I really like about them is that they're literally called Deep Strike and Feel No Pain, exactly how the majority of the hobby tends to refer to those sort of things, even when they have a million different special rules, whether it's Warp Strike, Dimensional Translocation, or Death from Below. We don't know if the Deep Strike rules will be literally exactly the same as they were in 9th edition, where your units just turn up 9 inches away from the enemy. It does seem like a fairly good system to me at the moment, the possibility of making a charge but not guarantees. In any case, that should be the same for the models that can do it. I guess there might be the possibility for some factions to play with it a bit if they have different Deep Strike rules, maybe Genestealer Cult or Demons perhaps. And then the other thing that they said as a universal special rule, which seemed like the other really obvious big win, is Feel No Pain. All the myriad different rules that can give you a 6+ to shrug off a wound, most commonly found on things like apothecaries and medics and things, though plenty of factions just have it baked into certain units. Again, seems pretty sensible. You can just say that this unit has Feel No Pain 5+ or 6+, and then everyone will know what you mean. I think cutting down on minor variations will be really quite a good thing for the game as well. It means that you don't need to worry about if the Deep Strike works very slightly differently for one faction or another. Though I guess that depends on how many little addendums or additions they feel like putting on these rules, which might just set us back to square one if they're not somewhat restrained. Besides these two fairly obvious ones, there's a bunch of other examples that they could easily implement. I feel like bodyguard type rules would be a sensible one. That's something that's fairly common to a bunch of factions for protecting characters. There's a bunch of other forward deployment type options, things that deploy in the midfield, say like Space Marine infiltrators, things that get a scout move, like say the Admech Cerberus Cavalry at the moment, or perhaps anything that can turn up from outflank for free, coming in from the side of the board. I feel like any and all of those could be pretty sensible to put into the universal special rules. I feel like aircraft would be nice to have their rules consolidated. They've got a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things that's reprinted on every single datasheet right now, and a few of them do act a bit differently. Plus, they could also use this section to consolidate a bunch of weapon rules as well, say for example Blast and Twin Links. We did see the Twin Links tag crop up on the Gaunts. Overall, I'd say that Universal Special Rules is quite a good move, provided they handle it sensibly and they don't go too mad and make a whole bunch of redundant ones. That was definitely a problem in 7th. The other bit that they mentioned out of that FAQ was the reactive core stratagems. It sounds like the idea behind this is having more ways that you can act in your opponent's turn, maybe kind of similar to things like Horus Heresy and maybe some mechanics from Age of Sigmar. One common requested thing for 40k is alternate activations. It seems like they don't want to go down this route yet, but this could be a bit of a halfway house to have some engagement in your enemy's turn, while not going full on alternative activations with literally every single unit in your army. They don't really give us too many clues about this one, just saying that there will be more ways to attack and defend in the enemy turn, and in their live stream they did confirm that there will be more core stratagems in general as well, compared with around about 7 or so that we have at the moment, a couple of them really niche. Currently in 40k we do have a few ways that we can already deal damage or defend in the enemy turn. Counter-offensive to interrupt combat, Overwatch to take pot shots at the enemy while they charge in, and command point rerolls which could help out with saving throws and give you more durability that way. I feel like all of those are pretty interesting game mechanics in their own right. If they go fairly close to things like Horus Heresy, we might get things where you might be able to make a reactionary move if you go too close to an enemy unit, or maybe some sort of option to take cover. That one could give a feel no pain type save in Heresy. And I did notice that there was one of the previous rumours that we talked about that went down this route a little bit. They seem to think that the Auspex scan style stratagem, where you intercept enemy reserves that come in nearby, that could be made into a generic one. And also the possibility for fighting on death for a character that gets slain. That's quite a common one for multiple codexes, so again could maybe be made into a core stratagem. Those two would really seem quite plausible. They'd fit the bill of being extra ways to deal damage in the opponent's turn. Sounds kind of interesting though, and I feel like any reactionary type things in this will be a little bit less gotchery, as they're going to be a core set of rules that everyone knows, so you can reasonably expect your opponents to be making counter moves if you know that your army can do it too. I'd say that those are the two major reveals for their Q&A. They did go through a few other things, but maybe the details are a bit more sparing. First up, there was the reasonable question of how's the new Combat Patrol game mode going to be balanced. They come back with a few cryptic hints that basically amount to "we're not telling you yet." The only thing that they've said is "with great ingenuity," which until they say otherwise I'm going to loosely translate as probably just altered stats and rules on the datasheets, maybe similar to how we saw the two different Tyranid Termagant datasheets in their live stream. You couldn't really balance these with points costs or anything, as you're always going to have the same models against each other in theory. So basically the way that they're going to be able to balance them is going to change how powerful the models are in game, I think. I guess they could also do it with things like layered special rules for the entire force, or how easy they could score objectives as well. Both of those will be possible. I feel like they're probably going to struggle without some changes to the core datasheet stats though. Some of the combat patrols just have a crazy amount of more points and threat in than other ones. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical as to how truly balanced this would work out to be. I feel like it would be a very hard job to keep something like 20 plus combat patrols actually fairly viable against each other in a completely new game system, and I feel like even with a crazy amount of playtesting that's probably going to struggle to land. Maybe if they had some sort of digital rules for this, and then they could maybe perhaps update them maybe 6 months down the line to try and make it a little bit more balanced against each other. That seems like it could be a good way to land at a good conclusion from this. Next up, they clarify that the OC stat on their datasheet stands for Objective Control. I'm not sure if they actually said this at all in their live stream or not, but it seemed to be the most logical thing. They confirm that the current Objective Secured system is gone. Interesting calling it slightly confusing. I guess it was a rule that could trip people up in the wrong circumstance. I guess it maybe is a little bit counterintuitive for newer players when you have both OBSEC models on both sides and non-OBSEC models and how that works out. Again, they didn't really say how the OC stat will work other than "we'll show you sometime later," but I strongly suspect that it will be add up the number of OC points that you have on each objective, and the one who's got more claims it. As I talked about recently in the datasheet breakdown video, I strongly suspect that the Tyranid Termagants get an OC stat of 2 because they're basically troops, and that means that they're going to have more points towards claiming objectives against their opponents. Next up, we've got the question, do vehicles and monsters still degrade? Perhaps an oddly specific one there, but kind of interesting, seeing as we haven't seen a datasheet for anything bigger than a Termagant yet. Their answer to this is that yes, they will degrade, but it will be more streamlined somehow than currently. I guess it's maybe a little bit clunky on the datasheet where they have multiple different stat blocks and then highlight the ones that get worse. Apparently in the new system there will be a single line on the datasheet which talks about the penalties to the model stat lines when certain wound thresholds are reached. It might just literally be a way of communicating the exact same information. Usually things like movement and weapon skill and ballistic skill tend to go down when the models get weaker. I feel like the degrading system is actually quite good. It gives you some good value to actually damaging a tank really quite badly, as opposed to being rather all or nothing as to whether you actually blow it up or not. Finally, they finish up with a couple of non-answers really, kind of to the point where I wonder why they bothered putting them in the FAQ section if they were just going to give you a nebulous answer, and arguably less than they even have before. First up they say, when does the new box come out? And they say, a bit of time, please sign up to our newsletter for more updates. When to be honest they have already given us at least some sort of time frame, as they said that 10th edition comes out in summer. Summer starts in late June, so I guess we can't reasonably expect the boxes to actually be shipped before June the 21st. Though given that they're giving us all these teasers all the way over in March, really quite a long time before, really makes me think that it's not going to be long after this. A bunch of rumours have said late June or maybe early July for 10th edition at the moment. I strongly suspect it's going to be in that pretty short window. Though admittedly that's still almost 3 months away at the moment, we'd have April, May and then most of June to still play 9th edition. Seeing as they'll definitely have the release date pretty much planned out at this point, I don't know why they don't just give us a roughly early summer estimate. No one's going to be too mad at them if it winds up being a bit delayed or anything, and it will just help out with people's collections and planning what they're doing. Finally, they have another bit of a non-answer to the question, can I use my current models and codexes? To that they say basically the models are staying the same, but for the codexes we'll have more details next week. Again, I'm unsure why they don't give a bit more of a definite answer to this one, seeing as they did say in the live stream. Basically the codexes are going to be replaced by these new digital download index cards plus datasheets, and then the cycle of codex release will start again in 10th edition. They said adding in some new flavour, things like different sub-factions and ways to play the army, and probably redesigning the datasheets for a second time. For the current model question, I guess in general they'd say yes, you can use your models, but I would suspect that there will be some cases where that might well be no. I would be quite wary about acquiring anything that doesn't actually come in a Games Workshop box and you can build in that kit. Say for example converted loadouts for exotic wargear combinations of say Deathwing Terminators, or maybe things like Deathwatch Veterans, or kit bashing HQ choices with certain wargear combinations that don't actually appear on Games Workshop's model for them. I'm not saying that that's all absolutely guaranteed to go away, but it seems like it's quite likely to under Games Workshop's no model, no rules policy. I do feel like that's something they're unlikely to say in one of these FAQ type things though, as it's not exactly going to go down very well. Overall though, despite some fairly sketchy details and a bunch of answers, we have got a few interesting things there. What do you make of the idea of returning universal special rules to Warhammer 40k? And any ideas for what they could do with these new revised universal stratagems? Let me know your ideas down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k updates coming. It's going to be fun to cover all the news of 10th edition as and when we get it. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.